The house in Los Angeles was a tomb long before the bodies were found. Tiernan de Haas stood in the yard, looking at the tire swing her father used to push her mother on. It was a private world for two people, and Tiernan was always the outsider looking in. There were no drawings on the fridge and no toys in the hallway. The house was built for a couple, not a family. Now, the police and paramedics were moving through the sterile rooms. Her parents were dead. They were found in their bedroom, dressed in expensive formal wear and locked in each other's arms. Her father had terminal cancer, and her mother chose to die with him rather than live a single day alone. They didn't leave a note for Tiernan. Even in their final moments, they had nothing to say to their only daughter. Mirai, her mother's assistant, cut down the tire swing in the yard. It was a small act of kindness that Tiernan felt deeply. As the media swarmed the gates outside, Tiernan felt a cold, sharp resentment. Her parents had left her to handle the mess of their choices. She retreated to the kitchen to make ramen, finding comfort in the simple rules of boiling water and noodles. It was a brief escape from a life spent in boarding schools and summer camps. Then, her private cell phone buzzed. It was Jake van der Berg, her father's estranged stepbrother from Colorado. He was her new legal guardian. He was blunt and honest, offering her a place in the mountains near Telluride. He spoke of a life with no Wi-Fi, no noise, and months of being snowed in. Tiernan looked at her empty, designer life and chose to run toward the silence. Tiernan arrived at the small airport with her Louis Vuitton luggage, feeling like a stranger in a world of evergreens. Jake was not what she expected. He was younger than her father, athletic, and intimidating. He told her she looked exactly like her mother, a comment that stung Tiernan, who was tired of being a shadow. As they drove his black truck into the mountains, Jake warned her about the isolation. They stopped at a candy store where Tiernan bought Swedish fish, a treat she hadn't allowed herself since she started dieting at 13 to please her mother. A local man warned Jake about controlling Kaleb, making Tiernan wonder about Jake's other son. They finally reached the homestead, a massive house of wood and stone that smelled of fresh water and rock. Inside, she met Noah, Jake's youngest son. He was 20, tanned, and offered her a beer as a welcome. The reality of the ranch hit her when she saw a dead buck hanging in the garage. Jake led her to a room on the second floor, mentioning that his son Kaleb lived on the third floor and liked his space. Jake told her she didn't need to call him uncle because they weren't truly related. His dark gaze left Tiernan feeling unsettled and very much alone. The first morning at the peak was hauntingly quiet. Tiernan called Mirai, feeling a strange guilt because she couldn't cry for her parents. She looked at the gray granite peak of the mountain and felt its power. The peace was broken when a nearly naked woman walked out of the shared bathroom, teasing Tiernan about her designer clothes. Downstairs, the tension between Tiernan and Jake grew. He mocked her pretty hands, comparing them to her father's soft life. To break the mood, Jake took her riding. He insisted on sitting behind her on the horse. The physical proximity was intense. She could feel the heat of his body and the vibration of his voice against her back. They rode to a waterfall where Jake warned her about the dangers of the woods. He handed her a rifle, and to his surprise, she shot a distant target with perfect aim. She told him she wouldn't kill animals, but she knew how to use the weapon. Jake ordered her to return to the house to cook and clean, listing the hard labor it took to run the ranch. He told her he might keep her there until she showed a real emotion, a laugh, a cry, or a scream. Tiernan felt a mix of fear and defiance. She wasn't just a guest, Jake was her master for the next 10 weeks. She found a punching bag in the workshop and hit it until her knuckles burned, finally letting out some of her hidden anger. Noah found her and laughed at her spirit, but he helped her in the kitchen. Tiernan checked her phone one last time, seeing the cruel comments online calling her a cold bitch. She deleted every app, cutting herself off from the world. She spent hours organizing her room, finding peace in the order of her clothes and shoes. Later, she helped Jake hammer siding onto the house. When she got a deep splinter in her palm, Jake didn't use tweezers. He used his teeth to pull it out. The feeling of his warm breath and the scruff of his chin against her skin left her breathless. To escape the feeling, she went inside and fixed a leaking refrigerator by watching a repair video. Noah was impressed, but Jake was angry. He didn't want her interfering with his well-oiled machine. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in. Tiernan woke up screaming from a night terror at 1:15 a.m. She was drenched in sweat and had clawed marks into her own arms. The trauma of her past was catching up to her in the dark. Jake sat in the quiet of the early morning, wondering if bringing Tiernan to the ranch was a mistake. He was a man who lived by hard rules, and he didn't know how to handle a grieving girl. He felt a strange, protective fire in his chest when he thought about her. He went to her room to apologize for being harsh, but she was already up and her bed was perfectly made. He found her in the kitchen, carefully gluing a broken plate back together. He was impressed by her quiet strength. He sent her to the stables with Noah to muck out the stalls. Noah made her change out of her white blouse into an old flannel shirt. Jake watched from a distance, feeling conflicted as he saw her skin. He received a call from Mirai, who told him he was unfit to guard Tiernan. She told him about the 1:15 a.m. terrors, a detail that bothered Jake deeply. He watched Tiernan work in the smelling heat of the barn, pushing herself until the job was done. He stepped in to tie a handkerchief around her face to help with the smell, his fingers lingering near her jaw. He saw her and Noah banting like friends, and it bothered him. He was stuck between wanting to punish her for her father's sins and wanting to keep her safe from everyone, including himself. As the rain poured down, Jake walked toward the house, knowing that Tiernan de Haas was far more dangerous to his peace of mind than he ever imagined. The morning started with a fight about money and belonging. Tiernan wanted to go to town for supplies and tried to refuse her father's wealth, but Jake stopped her. He told her she was theirs now and they would pay for what she needed. It was a claim of ownership that felt both heavy and certain. Noah took her to town on his dirt bike, forcing her to hold on to him as they sped through the mountain air. In the pharmacy, Tiernan felt the eyes of the locals. A girl named Cece Diggins was hostile, but Noah stepped in, telling everyone that Tiernan lived with them. On the ride back, Noah hit a nerve. He told Tiernan that her parents probably resented her for coming between them. It was a cruel truth that Tiernan had felt her whole life but never heard out loud. She was always the shadow in their bright, private world. That night, the trauma returned. Tiernan woke at 1:15 a.m. having torn her shirt in her sleep. Feeling broken, she decided to pack her bags and run to Costa Rica. She went to the laundry room to get her clothes, but the door kicked open. Kaleb van der Berg walked in, drenched in the blood of a dead deer hanging around his neck. He was a terrifying, primal figure. He washed the blood off his muscled body, ignoring her until the air turned thick and dangerous. He pinned her against the wall, smelling her skin like an animal. He didn't speak. He moved her onto the hood of a car, his hands and mouth moving with a hungry efficiency. Tiernan felt a traitorous heat in her body even as she told him to stop. When he didn't, she slapped him and screamed. Noah rushed in to pull Kaleb away, explaining that Tiernan was family and untouchable. It was then that Tiernan learned the truth. Kaleb hadn't spoken a word since he was 4 years old. He was a silent, selective mute who lived like a wild thing in the woods. The next day, the house felt like a theater of war. Tiernan saw Jake in the bathroom with only a towel, just as another woman left his room. The men had a rotating door of partners, but they watched Tiernan like hawks. At breakfast, she refused to serve Kaleb, leading to a silent power struggle over the syrup. Needing to breathe, Tiernan drove to a secluded pond to swim. She was followed by Terence Holcomb, a local rider who saw her as a shiny new toy. He teased her about the Van der Berg men keeping her to themselves. Before things could go further, Noah and Kaleb arrived on their bikes. Kaleb stood on the shore with a shotgun, his silence more threatening than any shout. They forced Tiernan to leave, marking her as their territory in front of the whole town. Back at the ranch, the tension exploded. Jake and Noah were furious she had been alone with another man. Tiernan finally snapped. She yelled that they were bullies and demanded to be sent home. Jake cornered her, calling her a spoiled brat. In a rare moment of total honesty, Tiernan broke down in tears. She told him she wasn't spoiled. She was just used to being a ghost. She told them that in her own home, no one ever spoke to her. The revelation stunned the men into silence. The next morning, Tiernan found a bag of cinnamon bears on her nightstand with a note. It said her parents never gave her anything sweet, and that was why she wasn't. Someone finally understood her coldness. Downstairs, Jake pulled her into a deep, protective hug. He told her she wasn't alone. Later, while fixing a fence, Jake told her why he hated her parents. They had ruined his first love, Flora, by framing her for an affair. Flora had killed herself because of their lies. It was a bond of shared trauma that pulled Tiernan closer to the man who was supposed to be her guardian. Relationship dynamics shifted again during a trip to the lake. Noah, feeling trapped by his father's rules, found comfort in Tiernan. They ended up in an accidental shower together after a playful scuffle in the bathroom. Sitting in the running water, Tiernan told him a secret. When she was 14, she walked into the ocean with a backpack full of heavy books, wanting the weight to pull her under. She chose to swim back, but the loneliness never left her. Noah recognized that same hole in himself. He decided he would stay through the winter if it meant being there for her. On the beach, he watched her look at Jake and felt a sting of jealousy. He warned Kaleb not to run her off, admitting that he liked having her around. The mountain was a prison, but Tiernan was becoming the reason to stay. The family went to a motocross race in the town of Ghent. The air was filled with the smell of gasoline and fire. Noah raced with a desperate need to escape the peak, but Jake refused to even watch him. They fought bitterly about Noah's future, the rift between father and son growing wider. Tiernan watched the local girls and felt a surge of boldness. She danced with Cece Diggins near a bonfire, knowing Kaleb was watching her from the shadows with his dark green eyes. She liked the power she felt over him. She admitted to Cece that she had been touching herself in the water earlier, refusing to be shamed for her own desires. She could feel the promise of the coming winter, knowing she would soon be locked away with these three men. The night ended with Jake's Neanderthal protectiveness. He saw the men looking at Tiernan and pulled her away, threatening to discipline her for drawing attention. Tiernan was finished with the double standards. On the drive back, the truck was filled with his casual bed buddies, yet he was acting like her owner. She looked Jake in the eye and challenged him. She told him that if they were going to claim her and keep her from other men, they weren't providing what a woman actually needs. She told him he wasn't doing for her what other men would do. Noah choked on his beer in the backseat. Jake was stunned into a hard, mirroring stare. The silence in the truck was suffocating and heavy with a new kind of tension. Tiernan didn't blink and she didn't look away. She was no longer a quiet girl to be corrected. She was a woman demanding to be seen. The house in Los Angeles was still a ghost in Tiernan's mind. One night, the smell of sterile candles and the memory of her parents' cold silence triggered a massive panic attack. She stood in the dark kitchen of the ranch, shaking and alone, until she found Jake sitting in the corner with a beer. The air between them was electric. Tiernan was dressed in almost nothing, and Jake watched her with a look that made her skin hum. He admitted he had been sitting there trying to talk himself out of giving her a long kiss goodnight. The tension broke into a desperate, hungry encounter against the sink. Tiernan craved the intimacy, but Jake pulled away. He told her she was just acting out of desperation for attention. He challenged her, saying she was punishing her dead parents by refusing to be happy. This harsh truth broke the dam. Tiernan sobbed into his chest, finally admitting the core of her pain. They didn't even leave her a note. In that moment, Jake wasn't a guardian or a lover. He was the person who finally saw her. He held her while she cried out years of neglect, telling her she was finally home. Life at the peak began to feel easy. Tiernan spent her mornings riding with Jake, feeling a level of peace she never knew. Even a trip to town for burgers felt like a family outing, despite being wedged between Noah and Kaleb in the truck. When a car nearly hit them, Kaleb's arm shot out to protect her, a silent sign that he was always watching. Later, Jake tried to teach her self-defense in the garage. The wrestling turned into something more when Jake noticed her new lace underwear. He was visibly rattled by the girl becoming a woman. Then, the real world called. Mirai phoned to say the funeral was in 2 days. Tiernan didn't want to go, but she knew she had to. Jake gave her the truck keys and told her to drive herself to the airport. He was convinced that once she saw her millions and her old life, she would never come back to their shithole in the mountains. The funeral in Glendale was a sun-drenched lie. High-profile friends gave speeches about parents Tiernan didn't recognize. They spoke of charity and legacy, but Tiernan only remembered the cold, white furniture and the silence. Mirai told her that as a child, the only way to stop Tiernan's night terrors was to crawl into bed with her. Tiernan realized she had been homeless her entire life, even in a mansion. She sat in the front pew and had a silent, angry conversation with the caskets. She hated their house and their hairspray. She realized she was done being a ghost. She didn't stay for the wake. She caught a flight and took an Uber back to the mountain in the middle of the night. The next morning, Jake and Noah were stunned to find Tiernan in the kitchen, dressed in Noah's oversized clothes. She didn't offer a sentimental greeting. Instead, she took over. She told them the machinery was too loud and gave them a list of chores. She told them they wouldn't get breakfast until the tractor was fixed and the stalls were mucked. The men were energized by her bossiness, rushing to do what she asked. That night, they had a barbecue to celebrate her return. Tiernan explained her mother's cynical theory of relationships using condiment bottles. Ketchup was for lust, the need for attention. Heinz was for learning, becoming demanding to find your power. A one was for love, a healthy balance. Jake and Noah were disturbed by the clinical advice, but Tiernan just laughed. She noted that the coming winter would be her chastity belt, keeping her away from other men. Noah sarcastically pointed out that the belt only worked for outsiders, not the 3 men in the house. Tiernan's 18th birthday arrived with the first scent of snow. Noah took her to town and gave her a burgundy hat that said wild. He opened up about his own mother, who only called him for money. They shared a moment of mutual understanding about parental neglect before he possessively told her not to let any local men touch her that night. Back at the house, Tiernan dressed in a short, backless pink dress and high heels. She felt like an adult for the first time. Jake gave her a compound bow, and Kaleb gave her a hand-carved leather belt with beautiful designs. Noah pointed out a dark detail. The notches on the belt were spaced to fit Tiernan's wrists, not her waist. The implication hung heavy in the air as they headed to a local steakhouse and then a rowdy saloon. In the bar, Tiernan lost herself in the music. She danced and felt the eyes of Jake and Noah on her. But the night turned sour when Terence Holcomb and Cece surrounded her. Cece whispered lies, saying Kaleb was violent and the men only wanted Tiernan for her money. Tiernan began to panic until Kaleb stepped in. He didn't say a word, but he kissed her forehead to calm her down. Then, his protective instinct turned to violence. Kaleb lunged at Terence, sparking a massive bar brawl. Bottles shattered and bodies flew. Noah pulled Tiernan to safety while Jake ordered them to the truck. Kaleb took the wheel in a silent rage. In one final act of defiance, he reversed the truck over a row of the local racers' motorcycles, crushing them into the dirt. A high-stakes police chase followed through the icy mountain roads. Kaleb drove like a madman, eventually killing the headlights and veering off the road into the pitch-black forest to lose the cops and the bikers. They navigated the trees in total darkness until they reached the safety of the ranch. Inside, Tiernan was terrified of the law and the retaliation that would surely come. But Noah began to laugh hysterically, the sound echoing through the house. He pointed out the window where the snow was falling in heavy, thick sheets. He explained the reality of their situation. The storm wasn't going to stop. The great winter had arrived. The roads were blocked, and all access to the outside world was gone. They were trapped on the peak, safe from the police and their enemies until the spring thaw in April. The trap had closed, leaving Tiernan alone with the 3 Van der Berg men for the next 5 months. The snowstorm outside was so thick that the night felt swallowed by white. Tiernan stood at her window, watching the 3 inches of powder already piling on her balcony. The house was silent, but a restless energy stirred inside her. She felt strangely content, as if everything she needed was now within these 4 walls. She picked up the belt Kaleb had given her, tracing the intricate carvings. When she looped it around her wrist and tightened it, her breathing turned shallow. The sensation sparked something sharp and unfamiliar. She went downstairs for firewood and found Kaleb sitting by the fireplace, watching her in the dark. His presence was heavy and impossible to ignore. Soon, Noah joined them, also armed and alert. He explained they were guarding the house against people like Holcomb, but Tiernan realized they were really guarding her. They began watching a movie, and the atmosphere shifted from protective to something much darker. Noah began testing boundaries, his teasing turning pointed. Tiernan felt the shift, but she didn't pull away. Both Noah and Kaleb were focused on her, their presence surrounding her completely. Just as the moment reached a peak, Jake's voice cut through the room like a blade. The tension collapsed. Jake sent his sons away and demanded to know what Tiernan wanted. When she admitted she hadn't wanted them to stop, Jake's control snapped. He disciplined her with an intensity that left her shaken, a mix of anger and a pull neither of them could ignore. The following week, Jake was consumed by a forbidden obsession. He punished Tiernan with the silent treatment, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. He decided it was time to break her cherry regarding the mountain way of life. He took her hunting, forcing her into the deep snow to shoot a buck. He told her she had to learn to provide if the men weren't around. Tiernan was distraught, tears glistening in her eyes, but Jake was harsh. In a rare moment of softness, he wiped her tears and kissed her temple, pleading with her to do it for her own safety. Mesmerized by his vulnerability, Tiernan fired and killed the deer. When the boys went to get the carcass, Tiernan broke down and lashed out at Jake, striking him in the jaw. Their argument turned into a frantic, mutual hunger in the freezing air. They retreated to the truck, where the tension reached a breaking point. Jake sent his sons home with the deer, claiming he needed to finish Tiernan's lesson. Inside the cab, Tiernan told him she was on birth control and wanted to feel everything for her first time. Jake gave in, acknowledging he was losing his sanity to her. As he took her virginity in the backseat, the encounter was intense and transformative. Tiernan guided him, her body meeting his with a desperate passion. Jake realized he was beautifully destroyed by her. The drive back to the house was thick with lingering passion and paternal guilt. Jake carried a disheveled Tiernan up the porch steps, asking if she felt bad about what happened. Tiernan reassured him that it was perfect, but Jake's reality remained grounded. He told her it could never happen again and that she must focus on her future at college. When they entered the house, Noah and Kaleb were waiting in the living room, their eyes fixed on Jake's unbuttoned shirt. Jake went to the shop to douse his head in cold water, but Noah followed him. A violent fight broke out between father and son. Noah challenged Jake's right to claim her, and the truth finally came out. Jake admitted something started between him and Tiernan weeks ago, while Noah revealed that Kaleb had already been intimate with her in the shop. Stunned, Jake realized he had no moral high ground. He told Noah to act right and let Tiernan make her own choices. Despite his resolve to stop, Jake found himself at Tiernan's door that night. He watched her in the dark, looking shy and playful. His self-control collapsed instantly. He carried her to his own bedroom and slammed the door, prioritizing the warmth of her presence over his guilt. Tiernan woke in Jake's bed at 1:21 a.m., feeling ached but content. They shared a quiet, intimate moment in the shower where Jake admitted that Tiernan reminded him of the passion and intensity of his youth. He told her she was ours and that the mountains were her true home. However, as Tiernan tried to return to her own room, she was intercepted by a simmering Kaleb in the dark stairwell. The encounter was violent and degrading. Kaleb was in a fit of rage over her connection with his father. He pinned her to her bed and used a Sharpie to write an insulting word across her forehead. Tiernan felt a flash of shame, but it quickly turned to amusement at his obvious jealousy. The next morning at breakfast, the tension was palpable. When Noah began to playfully tickle Tiernan, Kaleb abruptly shattered the peace. He deliberately flipped his bowl and a pot of oatmeal, dousing Tiernan in food. He then flipped the entire kitchen table and stormed out. Tiernan refused to be intimidated, calling him a baby. Later, she found Kaleb in his private workspace in the barn. He was shirtless, covered in blood, and dismembering a kill. When he noticed her, he provocatively licked blood off his finger and offered a dark, audible chuckle. It was the first time she had heard his voice like that, and it shook her to the core. To occupy her time during the long winter, Tiernan began restoring old furniture she found in the barn loft. Jake and Noah helped her move a carved chest into the shop. Tiernan used the project to avoid thinking about her college applications and the life that would eventually pull her away from the peak. One evening, she worked in the shop with Noah. He confessed he had heard her and Jake the night before. His words were sharp with jealousy, but he also admitted to a shared void in their lives. They crawled beneath a motorcycle they were repairing, and a tense, intimate encounter unfolded. Noah admitted he wanted to make love to her, seeking emotional weight rather than just a casual act. He watched her with hungry intensity, pleading with her to let him into her bed that night. He promised Jake would never find out. Tiernan felt the overwhelming temptation to surrender to the ease she felt with Noah, but a flash of fear took over. She apologized and fled the shop, running back to the house to escape the complication of her feelings. When she reached her bedroom, she saw Jake across the hall, fresh from the shower and wrapped in a towel. The sight of him triggered a primal need. Tiernan stripped in front of him, and Jake immediately crossed the hall, slamming her door shut. As he pinned her against the wall with a rough, growling intensity, Tiernan realized she was no longer just a guest or a ward. She was trapped between the different, powerful hungers of these three men, and the winter had only just begun to lock them in. The quiet of the early morning felt like a rare gift. Tiernan sat at the table, struggling with a sketch that wouldn't come right. She felt a presence behind her and knew it was Kaleb. Instead of his usual coldness, he reached out and gently stopped her from tearing the page. Without a word, he showed her how to blend the colors with his fingers, his touch surprisingly careful. In that moment of calm, Tiernan found herself talking about her childhood and how her parents used to throw her drawings away. Kaleb didn't speak, but he leaned into her, providing a silent, grounding comfort. Later, she ventured into his room for the first time. She didn't find her missing laundry, but she found her red ribbon hidden among his things. It was proof that the silent, predatory man noticed her more than he let on. He kept pieces of her. When Jake left for a trip, Noah tried to claim her, pulling her into his lap and telling her she was trapped with his father. But Tiernan pushed back. She told him she wasn't confused or taken advantage of. She chose this life. She chose them. The peace of the mountain was shattered by a scream and the scent of smoke. Tiernan woke to an orange glow reflecting on the snow. The barn was on fire. While Jake was away, a catastrophic blaze took hold of the roof, threatening the stables. Noah raced out into the 6-inch snowfall to save the livestock, but Tiernan was driven by a singular focus: the horses. Despite the heat and the falling debris, she charged into the burning stable. In the chaos of the stampede, her upper arm was sliced deep by a jagged piece of wood. Blood poured down her skin as she collapsed in the snow. Kaleb took a desperate risk, using a heavy digger to topple the water tower. A massive wave of water doused the flames, leaving the yard a blackened, steaming ruin. Kaleb swept the injured Tiernan into his arms, pushing Noah aside. The power dynamic had shifted again, and as he carried her into the house, Tiernan realized that in the face of death, these were the only people who mattered. The kitchen table surgery that followed was brutal and visceral. Miles from a hospital and trapped by the storm, Kaleb prepared a needle and thread. Tiernan was paralyzed by terror, her screams echoing through the house. In a moment of shocking tough love, Kaleb delivered a sharp slap across her face. The physical shock broke her hysteria, redirecting her focus to the ringing in her ears rather than the needle in her skin. Noah climbed onto the table behind her, fisting her hair and pulling her head against his chest to keep her still. To distract her from the agony of the stitches, the brothers began to use intimacy. Kaleb kissed her with a searing intensity while Noah bit her neck and held her throat. Pain and pleasure became indistinguishable. Noah whispered that she was ours as the last knot was tied. Tiernan realized that even in their violence, she felt more protected and alive than she ever had in her sterile life in Los Angeles. The night culminated in Kaleb's attic bedroom. The power was out, and the house was draped in shadows. Tiernan explicitly said yes to both of them, knowing this choice would change everything. In the dim light of the fire, Noah and Kaleb shared her in a coordinated, intense encounter. Noah offered the emotional warmth she craved, while Kaleb watched from the corner with burning green eyes. Tiernan eventually took control, inviting Kaleb to join them. She felt a profound sense of belonging as they moved in a synchronized rhythm. Kaleb's silence wasn't a lack of words. He talked to her through his possessive touch. She felt his attachment when she saw him tuck her red ribbon back into his pillowcase before they fell asleep. For Tiernan, the attic was a sanctuary, a sweet little secret hidden away from the rest of the world. The outside world eventually intruded through a phone call from Mirai. A scandalous article had been published, claiming Tiernan's father was an abuser who forced her mother into a suicide pact. The news felt like a violation of her mountain sanctuary. Tiernan knew her parents weren't perfect, but she knew her mother was exactly where she wanted to be. She felt a surge of loyalty and instructed her lawyer to sue the publication. She wanted them to reveal their fake sources. Standing up for her family gave her a new sense of self-respect. Jake returned to find the barn in ruins and Tiernan scarred. He sensed the shift in the house but offered her an easy way out by asking about her college apps. He was giving her a chance to leave, but Tiernan wasn't sure she wanted to go. She spent the following days decorating the house for Christmas, crafting a wild wreath that made the ranch feel more like a home than any mansion ever had. The tension between the brothers reached a breaking point in the quiet of the kitchen. While tending to Tiernan's bandage, Noah offered a dark, possessive proposal. He suggested that they should get her pregnant so she would never be able to leave the mountain. Tiernan was stunned, weighing his kindness against the volatile pull she felt toward Kaleb. Before she could answer, Kaleb appeared like a shadow. He didn't use violence. He simply took Tiernan's hand, and she felt an immediate heat. He ordered Noah away with a sharp look, and Tiernan followed him, choosing the not-good man over the stable one. But the night took a shocking turn. Instead of taking her to his bed, Kaleb pushed her into her own room and pointed at the bed. He exited and slammed the door. Tiernan heard the sound of a metal bolt sliding home. He had locked her in from the outside. Her guilt and desire instantly turned into a boiling, vengeful rage. She kicked and pounded on the door, screaming for Jake and Noah, but they were in the shop and couldn't hear her. She was trapped by Kaleb's jealous whim, and as she bellowed through the wood, she realized the winter had turned the house into a beautiful, dangerous cage. The night inside the locked room was a storm of dark satisfaction and resentment. Kaleb watched Tiernan sleep, her body finally still after an hour of screaming and pounding against the door he had bolted shut. He felt a toxic mix of loathing and desire. He was sick of her sharing herself with his father and brother, and he wanted to punish her for it. He climbed onto the bed and began to touch her while she was still trapped in a nightmare, his movements a blend of spite and hunger. He mentally labeled her with insults he couldn't speak, forcing her to lift her own shirt to expose herself as he worked his fingers against her. When she woke, she called him an asshole, but she didn't push him away. She begged for release, but Kaleb abruptly pulled his hands away, leaving her shaking and unfinished. He viewed it as a successful round of a war she didn't know they were fighting. When he finally entered her, Tiernan began to cry. She whispered that he often looked at her like she was nothing. The physical connection shifted the air, and for a moment, the hate felt like a lie. They were both made for one another because neither knew how to let people in except through this wordless act. But as the image of his family with her flashed in his mind, Kaleb stopped again, leaving her floating and confused in the dark. The encounter took a violent turn as Kaleb flipped Tiernan over. He used the leather belt he had given her for her birthday to bind her wrists to the iron headboard. He descended into a cold, predatory state, ignoring her repeated pleas for him to stop. Tiernan felt like an object, not a partner. When she finally managed to work a wrist free, she struck him in a burst of desperate tears and fled the room naked. She sought refuge in Noah's bed, locking the door and seeking the comfort of his presence to drown out the realization that Kaleb's actions were born of hate. As they lay in the dark, Noah revealed the origin of the silence. He told her how their mother had left 4-year-old Kaleb locked alone in a car at a drug party for 4 days. He had no food and only rainwater to drink. By the time their father found him, Kaleb had fallen into a catatonic state of filth and silence. His refusal to speak was his only way to punish a world that had abandoned him. Tiernan attempted a gesture of peace at 4 a.m., finding Kaleb in the bathroom. But the truce was shattered when she saw what he was clutching, a blue-green leg from the furniture chest she had worked so hard to build. She ran to the shop and found her creation reduced to ash and sparks in a burn barrel. The sight of her destroyed work triggered a visceral memory of her childhood drawings being thrown away. Her grief turned into a blinding, murderous rage. Tiernan grabbed a steel pipe and began a systematic destruction of the shop. She smashed the bookshelf and the desk, screaming that Kaleb could not hurt her because she was nothing. Jake and Noah watched in horror as she lost herself in the fury. Kaleb watched the carnage for a moment before grabbing his survival pack. Despite the freezing storm, he prepared to exile himself. Before vanishing into the black night, he held Tiernan's gaze and tapped his hand flat against his chest twice. It was a cryptic gesture that meant nothing to her then as he disappeared into the snow. A week of heavy silence settled over the house. Tiernan spent her mornings avoiding the gazes of Jake and Noah, her heart cold and resentful. She declared she was leaving the mountain in April, a move that tensed the entire household. Jake tried to bridge the gap, telling her that the mountain was her home and they loved her. He explained the gesture Kaleb made before leaving. It was sign language for mine. Tiernan scoffed, but the thought of Kaleb alone in the 0-degree cold lingered in her mind. She retreated to his dark, cold room and picked up his pillow, breathing in his scent of wood and leather. She realized she was still tied to him. Seeking a deeper connection, she discovered a worn copy of Don Quixote inside his pillowcase. To her shock, the flyleaves were covered in Kaleb's scratchy handwriting. She searched every book on his shelves and found years of journals, the words he could never speak aloud. The writings revealed a man drowning in things he couldn't say. Kaleb wrote about being called stupid in school and his desperate love for the woods where he felt safe. He confessed to watching Tiernan smile when she didn't know he was looking and admitted to coming into her room every night to hold her through her nightmares. His words alternated between jealous rage and a heartbreaking fear that she would never love him. Seeing his raw vulnerability, Tiernan realized Kaleb wasn't an animal. He was a man who didn't know how to ask for help. Filled with a new sense of purpose, she woke Noah in the middle of the night. She didn't ask. She commanded. They were going to get Kaleb. Tiernan and Noah struggled through 18-degree weather and a worsening storm, heading north toward an isolated fishing cabin. They left a note for Jake and pushed through knee-deep snow until they found a hidden, rock-walled glen. At the center sat a one-room cabin, but it was empty. Tiernan felt a wave of dread until the next morning when the snow turned to rain. She stepped out onto the porch and saw a massive buck standing in the brush. Then she saw Kaleb. He was aiming his rifle at the animal, but his gaze locked onto Tiernan instead. He looked rugged and soaked, but he was alive. The tension of their 2-month separation broke instantly. Kaleb rushed her, crushing his mouth against hers in a desperate, euphoric kiss. Tiernan finally gave voice to her feelings, crying out that she loved him as he carried her inside and kicked the door shut. Inside the cabin, the reconciliation was fierce. Kaleb inspected the scar on her arm before they stripped off their damp clothes and fell onto the bed. Tiernan whispered that there had been no one else since he left, wanting him to know her loyalty. Their intimacy was interrupted by Noah hammering on the door, shouting in the cold, but Tiernan didn't care. She held Kaleb tightly, finally feeling whole. She realized the man who hides in the woods was the only one who could truly see her. She didn't care about the mess they were returning to or Jake's eventual fury. All that mattered was the weight of Kaleb's body and the way he claimed her as his own. She whispered his name again and again, letting the tears fall freely. The cabin, once cold and empty, was filled with a heat that defied the winter. Kaleb's hands were rough, but his movements were filled with a desperate kind of worship. Tiernan clung to him as the rain drummed against the tin roof, a steady rhythm marking the beginning of something new. She finally believed in a home that wasn't a place, but a person. She knew that no matter how deep the snow got, she would always find her way back to this. Tiernan woke in the early morning light of the fishing cabin, her fingers tracing the ridge of Kaleb's nose. Across the room, Noah slept, a reminder of the strange, shared bond that had kept them alive through the winter. She looked at the tattoo on Kaleb's neck, the word Credence. It meant a belief in the truth, and for the first time, Tiernan chose to believe in him. She didn't care that he might never speak a word to her. She asked if she could stay in the glen forever, but Kaleb shook his head. He wanted her to have a life beyond a hovel without plumbing. 2 weeks later, they were back at the main house, racing dirt bikes and living in a blur of shared nights. But the outside world was waking up. Jake was erratic and gruff, terrified of Tiernan getting pregnant at 18 and missing college. He spent his days in a shouting match over the phone with Mirai, who was calling relentlessly. As February turned to March, Noah pulled Tiernan aside. He told her she was meant for more than a mountain where nothing changed but the seasons. He warned her that Kaleb would never leave, and eventually, the excitement would fade. Tiernan felt the first crack in her sanctuary, a ticking clock she couldn't ignore. The thaw of April brought a different kind of fear. Tiernan stood in the bathroom, staring at a negative pregnancy test, her shoulders dropping in a massive wave of relief. She wasn't ready to be a mother. When she told Kaleb about the scare, his reaction was silent and shocking. He walked into the bathroom, grabbed her birth control pills, and dropped them into the trash. It wasn't an accident, it was a claim. He wanted a future with her that was permanent. But the reality of the outside hit them the moment they drove into town. The streets felt unfamiliar, and the people felt loud. Then, they saw Cece Diggins. She was visibly pregnant, and the timing was a knife to Tiernan's heart. She demanded to know if the baby was Kaleb's. She asked if he had tried to throw away her pills because he knew the truth and wanted to trap her before she found out. Kaleb stayed silent, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the wheel. He gave her nothing, no nod, no shake of the head. Something inside Tiernan broke. She couldn't live in another home where love was withheld through silence. She climbed onto the back of Noah's bike and let him drive her away, leaving Kaleb standing alone on the road. Back at the ranch, the chaos only grew. Noah had organized a photo shoot for the family business, and Tiernan used the makeup and the cameras as a shield. She posed suggestively with Noah on the bikes, trying to feel like the polished, distant girl she used to be. Kaleb watched from the sidelines, his eyes filled with a pain he couldn't vocalize. When local racers began making crude remarks about Tiernan, Kaleb's protective instinct turned to a violent brawl. Jake had to drag him away and throw the outsiders out. He ordered the boys into the truck, telling Tiernan he needed to handle the sheriff and get the truth about Cece. Alone in the house, Tiernan felt the weight of her choice. She began to pack a suitcase, her heart aching as she realized she couldn't survive on fragments of affection anymore. She went to Kaleb's room and wrote a final message in his journal. She told him she loved him, but she needed to be heard. She needed to be seen. The storm outside intensified, and the barking of the dogs drew Tiernan to the barn. Inside, she found a nightmare. Terence Holcomb was waiting in the shadows, smoke curling from his cigarette. He revealed that he and his crew had set the first barn fire and were there to finish the job. He offered to make Kaleb's legal troubles disappear if Tiernan sponsored him, a disgusting demand for her money and her body. Tiernan didn't hesitate. She was no longer a victim. She grabbed her compound bow and defended her home. She fired an arrow that struck Terence in the shoulder, stopping his advance. She retreated to the house, locking the doors and fighting off the men until Jake, Noah, and Kaleb returned. The truth came out quickly. Kaleb wasn't the father of Cece's baby, Terence was. The relief was short-lived, however. As the house quieted, Kaleb saw the suitcase by the door. His trauma took over. To him, a suitcase meant abandonment, just like his mother. Instead of fighting for her, he shut down. He became a robot, picking up her bags and loading them into Mirai's car. He didn't ask her to stay. He simply opened the passenger door and waited for her to leave. 6 weeks later, the house in Los Angeles felt like a tomb. Tiernan sat in the white marble kitchen, surrounded by a wealth that felt meaningless. She moved through the cold, staged rooms, realizing that nothing there held any warmth or memory. Mirai handed her the will. Her parents had left her everything, but it was just proof of their distant, clinical care. Tiernan finally took the urn containing their ashes to the tree where the tire swing once hung. She dug into the earth and poured the ashes into the ground, burying the physical remains of the people who had ignored her for 17 years. She ordered an auction house to sell everything else. She was done being a ghost. She spent her days working with her hands, redecorating her room and finding a design school in Seattle. She spoke to Jake, but she refused to return. She needed to stand on her own, even if the loneliness pressed in on her like a weight. One overcast morning, Tiernan lay in the sand at Huntington Beach. She felt the light rain on her face, a steady rhythm that reminded her of the mountain. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up to find Noah. He had found his own path, securing a racing sponsorship and building a future. Their reunion was warm, a steady connection in a world that had felt empty. But when the conversation turned to Kaleb, the news was grim. Kaleb had exiled himself back to the fishing cabin the moment Tiernan left. He hadn't come back down. Noah insisted that Kaleb loved her, but Tiernan knew the truth was much darker. She looked out at the ocean and realized that Kaleb wasn't just hiding in the woods, he was hiding in his own mind. He was still the 4-year-old boy locked in a car for 4 days, waiting for someone to find him but unable to call out. She realized he was still in that car, emotionally stuck in the filth and the silence of his childhood. He was unable to move forward, and she was unable to reach him through the glass. Noah moved into the house in Los Angeles, taking over Tiernan's parents' old room. He finally had a sponsor and a future, and for the first time since leaving the mountain, Tiernan felt a sense of quiet stability. But the house was anything but quiet. Jake and Mirai were locked in a constant, heated argument in the sitting room, their voices sharp and relentless. Jake mocked the cold, dead decor of the mansion, while Mirai fired back with equal fire. Tiernan stood in the hallway, listening unseen, and realized she wasn't annoyed by the noise. She was comforted by it. The bickering and the tension felt real, far better than the hollow silence she had lived in for weeks. Jake insisted the mountain was her real home and he would do anything to protect her. Mirai wouldn't back down, but neither of them left. Tiernan slipped upstairs, exhausted but peaceful, knowing that these loud, difficult people were now her family. In the middle of the night, a sharp sound against her window woke her. Tiernan sat up, listening to the quiet of the Los Angeles night. She walked to the window and pulled back the curtain, her breath catching in her throat. A rope hung from the tree in the yard, a new tire swing, smaller and swaying gently in the breeze. The original had been cut down months ago, yet there it was. Tiernan rushed outside into the damp grass, her pulse quickening as a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Kaleb. He shouldn't have been there. He had never left Colorado in his life. He held out his hand, and Tiernan took it. Instead of guiding her into the tire, he lifted her on top of it. He pulled back and let her go, the swing surging forward. Tiernan laughed, the sound escaping freely as she flew through the air. The past, the pain, and the silence all faded under the simple feeling of being weightless. When the swing slowed, Kaleb handed her a folded paper, the old article of her parents on the swing while she watched from the window. He was making her the center of the story now. Then, the world shifted. Kaleb spoke. His voice was low and rough from years of disuse, but it was clear. He told her it was time. Tiernan stared at him, unable to process the sound of his voice after so much silence. He told her that his home was wherever she was and that he had left the mountain for her. He explained that after she left, he had stayed in the fishing cabin alone, reading aloud to himself for weeks. He had forced himself to hear his own voice so he could finally reach her. He had read her letter and understood that she needed more than fragments. He apologized for taking so long. Tiernan told him she loved him, and finally, he said the words back. The silence that had defined them was gone, replaced by something real and spoken. Kaleb lifted her into his arms, his voice soft but sure as he asked to see her books so he could keep reading to her. She smiled and hugged him tight as he carried her into the house, leaving the ghosts of her childhood behind for good. 5 years later, the heat of a July morning settled over a campsite on the mountain. Tiernan and Kaleb lay together in a tent, the rhythm of their lives now steady and deep. Tiernan had finished her degree while raising their 18-month-old son, Griffin, and they had built a life that moved between the world and the peak. Kaleb watched her, overwhelmed by how much she still affected him after all this time. Their son was growing fast, with light hair and bright eyes, a perfect mix of them both. The family was back at the waterfall where everything had begun. Noah was there, his racing career having taken off, acting as the devoted uncle to Griffin. Jake stood by the water, fishing in the early light, having found a sense of acceptance and peace with his sons and the woman who had changed their lives. The conversation between the brothers turned toward their mother, who was now gone. The weight of the past was still complicated, filled with anger and confusion, but the bitterness had begun to fade. Noah spoke about wanting to remember her differently, to see what she might have been before the drugs and the mistakes. Kaleb didn't say much, the memories of the car still a part of him, but he agreed to take part of her ashes to scatter on the mountain. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a beginning. They stood together in the fresh air, the family business expanding and the future looking bright. There was no resentment left in the house, only the noisy, beautiful reality of a family that had fought hard to find each other. Tiernan joined them, full of energy and holding Griffin. Together, they took the boy into the water, letting him splash and laugh as he adjusted to the cold. They moved deeper, stepping behind the crashing water of the falls, a place that held so many intense memories of uncertainty and desire. Kaleb teased her about the past, their dynamic still sharp and alive, the tension between them now easy and familiar. He pulled her close, his gaze fixed on her, and suggested they meet again later when the darkness came. Tiernan bit her lip, teasing him back before slipping away with their son. She challenged him, disappearing through the falling water with Griffin in her arms. Kaleb watched them go, a smile touching his face as he thought about the woman who had taught him to speak and the life they had built together. He looked at the curtain of water and the mountain around them, knowing he would find her again tonight and every night after. She disappeared with Griffin through the falls, and he smiled at all the nights ahead of them.